How many of y'all saw that advertisement over the holidays? Yeah, it was a really profound thing that's capitalizing on the fact that a lot of us don't have a lot of time. And so, to that end, I have this old school contraption to make sure that I don't go over and that everything stays on time today. I like these ways of measuring time because it reminds us of something that we all know. Time is limited. So today I want to talk to the really, really busy, which isn't everybody, but it might be some of you. I know a lot of people think they're busy, but they're not. So for example, do we have any college freshmen here right now? Yeah, they wouldn't be in first service, would they? Yeah, college freshmen think they're busy. But if a college freshman goes up to a college senior, they will not get out 10 words about how busy they are before a college senior interrupts them, telling them, you don't know what busy is. College seniors, you could try going up to a parent of young children and telling them how busy they are, but it wouldn't go over well. If you went up to my wife and started talking about how busy you were, she'd hit you. Not because she's mean, but because she hasn't slept in years. I mean, y'all know this, like people have different levels of busyness. And today I want to talk to not just the people who are busy, but the people who are bad at being busy. And you'll know this sermon is for you. If you find yourself constantly saying things like, I'm going to be a little bit late, or I need to leave this early, or if you're going to the children's event that your kids are at and you try to figure out what time your kid's part is going to be and you just show up for that. If you're at home and you're thinking about work, or you're at work and you're constantly thinking about home, this is a sermon for you. Because chances are you have bought into a really big lie that you can do everything, that you're not limited. And it's probably leading you to a life where you can't actually enjoy anything. So, if you have your Bibles, turn to the book of Psalms, which is what the people of God used to be like the hymn book for the people of God. In fact, some of these are still the songs that we sing today. There's a song written by one of the most influential people in human history, a guy named Moses. And today we're going to look at the first 12 verses of Psalm chapter 90. There's a song that was really popular. It's something that people used to sing. But before you get this, you need to know a little bit about Moses. In case you're new to church or the Bible, Moses was this really influential person. He actually helped lead the Israelites out of slavery. But originally, Moses was he was an Israelite. But in the season of time when the Egyptians were actually killing Israelite babies through a bizarre set of circumstances, he gets adopted into Egyptian royalty, even though they're killing babies like him. So Moses gets raised with all this power and privilege. He's raised by Egyptian royalty. He's taught all these amazing things about like how to lead, how to be a leader. He's given enormous access and resources, and then one day he sees an Egyptian killing or hurting one of his Hebrew Israelite, one of the fellow Hebrews. And so in a moment of passion, he raises up and kills an Egyptian, and that was not a good career move. So Moses had to run away. He had to walk away from the palace and all the resources that he had, and now he's in exile just so he can stay alive. And so 40 years he spends in the palace. And the next 40 years he spends in the wilderness watching sheep. Now, I've actually been a shepherd at one season in my life, which technically I've just watched a few sheep, but I'm a shepherd. I was a shepherd for a while, and it's so boring. It is the animal kingdom's version of watching paint dry. And now Moses had everything. For 40 years he had everything, and now for 40 years, for 4 decades, he just watches sheep. But that's Moses' lot in life. He had it all, and he lost it. And then, after 40 years of doing this menial job, God comes to Moses and says, I want you to lead the Israelites out of slavery. Moses has now become appropriately small. And what I mean by that is he doesn't think that highly of himself. That's actually one of the things the Bible says about him, that he was a very meek man. And so when God asked Moses to lead his people out of slavery, Moses at first actually refuses. He doesn't think he's the guy for the job, which, by the way, this is just a side note. One of the markers of Christian leadership is that you don't feel adequate for the calling you have. If you have leaders who think that they're like, yeah, this is totally what I should be doing with my life, that's a marker of pride. Moses is a great leader, and one of the first qualifications is that he doesn't think he's a great leader. But just because God calls him doesn't mean it's going to be easy. For 40 years, Moses is going to lead a group of grumbling, complaining ingrates around the wilderness, and only God knows where. Literally, only God knew where. They're in the wilderness, wandering around. Ultimately, he's Israel's first leader. He's going to put a dent in the universe. He changes the world. But before he dies, that same Moses, towards the end of his life, writes this song in Psalm chapter 90. Starting in verse 1, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God's. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They're like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, all of our secret sins in the light of your presence. All of our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger, your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Now, we live in a world that doesn't get this psalm, and part to our own detriment, because we don't think like this anymore, to our own loss. We no longer think about our death as inevitable. We talk about death, and when we do talk about it, it's how to postpone it. In a lot of ways, by the way, that refusal to accept limits is good. I mean, we put a person on the moon, right? Refusal to accept limits causes us to stretch and grow, but a refusal to accept limits has a huge downside as well, because it refuses to accept a whole part of our life. It refuses to see ourselves in our proper place. And this song that Moses wrote actually jars us out of delusion by reminding us that we're actually creatures, that we're sustained by God, that God made us, and that ultimately God gives every breath we take, and ultimately there will be a day when our breath just stops. This is actually a very comforting song to the people who would have first sang it, because it doesn't start with death, it starts with God. The unchanging nature of God. God is the one who's been here. He was here before you. He'll be here after you. Yes, human life is fleeting, but time is measured in years. The time that you're going to be alive is just a blink to the eye of God. And that doesn't have to bother us so much. This is what the psalm is saying. It doesn't have to bother us so much because we're not at the center of things. From all generations, God has been around. God has been God, and God will continue to be God. So what does that have to do with your time? When I was in high school, Will Ferrell was on Saturday Night Live, and there was this skit that I thought was really actually had some profound implications. Will Ferrell's playing a dad. He's at the dinner table with his wife, and he's got a couple of kids. And every time his kids start complaining about anything, Will Ferrell gets really mad, and he yells something like, "I drive a Dodge Stratus," or "I'm a divisional manager." And I like that because I've seen that happen so many times. People they have some area of influence in one part of their life, try to make that apply to all the other parts of their life, as if that's the way the world worked. Yeah, okay, you're a doctor. You're important. That doesn't mean you're a good parent. That doesn't mean that you're, good at like being a friend. Why should it? That's a totally different area of life. You've seen this. You've seen people in airports yelling on their phone about how, their job because they want people around them to know I have an important role. I think this is a good symptom of having a bad relationship with our time. We take ourselves too seriously. We think it's all up to us. And in the process, you know what happens? We lose the perspective that all of life, every second of life is a gift. I have this conversation with my peers and friends a few times a month. Literally a few times a month. Maybe it's because of the season I'm in life, but there's something about life that if you don't keep checking yourself, you start to take yourself too seriously. And maybe a lot of it is the generation I grew up in. I grew up in a generation that grew up on a diet of self-esteem, and we're constantly being told we're a cause-driven generation, that we're going to make a difference in the world, and we believed a lot of the hype, and it's killing us. But we must never forget, God did not use Moses in his first 40 years. When he's in the Egyptian palaces, when he has all the access to privilege and power, God uses Moses in the desert. But before God uses Moses, he's going to make him go out into the wilderness for 40 years watching sheep to remind him of who he is and who he isn't. This is basically the screenplay for Karate Kid, right? Wax on, wax off. All of a sudden he realizes he's actually learning some karate moves. Moses, in watching for 4 decades these obstinate, stubborn animals in a wilderness, has no idea that God is actually going to prepare him for obstinate, stubborn human beings in a wilderness. God humbled Moses before he did anything to let him see his own vulnerability and limits, and then God used him. And I want you to see how that psalm right there, that little section ends. He says, so God, give us a heart of wisdom and teach us to number our days, which is another way of saying your days are numbered. That doesn't sound like a very optimistic message, does it? But it is. So to prepare for this message, I got on this website called, I think it's Death Clock or something. Deathclock.com, something like that. Anyway, you put in your body mass index, how tall you are, whether what year you were born, whether you smoke or not, and it tells you when you're going to die. And so my death date is July 4th, because I'm an American, 2068. And when I first heard that, I was like, that's not a real date. 2068, by then I'll be drinking moon juice and walking my, space dog or whatever. And then it said, you have just a little bit over 1 billion seconds to live. And that's when it started to get a little bit real for me. Because I know people who have $1 billion and I have less seconds than they have dollars. And that's a problem, right? Think about your life. We live our days like we're going to live forever. Parents, do we not spend our time as if we're going to be parenting forever? One of my good preacher buddies is about 5-10 years older than me. And he told me something last year I will never forget. It's changed the way I look at weekends. He said when his kids were 5 and 3, he has 2 boys, when his kids were 5 and 3, an older man came up to him and said, you have a limited number of Saturdays. You have a limited number of weekends with your boys. And just this last August, as he was sending his oldest Caleb off to ACU, they start their welcome week on Sundays. And so he was helping his son pack up on a Saturday. And as he was putting his stuff in boxes, it dawned on him, this is my last Saturday. How would you parent if you realized your days are numbered? How would you go about your life if you realized this? I think if we took this seriously, it would change our calendars. It would change our lives because it changed our calendars. Because we cram so much into our calendar because we're trying to live as if our days aren't numbered, but they are. There is a reason that Moses wrote this song, because remembering your time is limited helps you think clearly about how to live with your limited time. So there's this woman named Bronnie Ware who was a hospice nurse for decades. She spent time with people in their last few days of their life, and she asked every one of them what their greatest regrets were. And she wrote a book ultimately about this, but she said these were the two biggest regrets that people had. Regret number 2 was, I wish I wouldn't have worked so hard. Without fail, she said, every male patient that I had, that I nursed, they said this. They missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. Women also spoke of this regret, but most were from an older generation. Many of the female patients had not been breadwinners. All the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on a treadmill of work's existence. And then regret number 1, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me, which is a way of saying, I wish I wouldn't have said yes to all those things. I wish I wouldn't have said yes to those things. I wish I would have said yes to the things that really, really mattered. And then she said, this is the most common regret of all. When people realize their life is almost over, when people who their days are numbered, and they know that because their days are numbered in a single digit, so they have incredible clarity, and they're radioing back to people like me and you, and they're saying, this is what I regretted about the way I lived my life. The most common regret of all was when people realize their life is almost over, they look back clearly on it. It's easy to see how many of the dreams they had go unfulfilled. Most people had not honored even a half of their dreams and had to die knowing it was due to choices they had made or not made. And then Bronnie Ware says, health brings a freedom very few realize until they no longer have it. This is someone who is giving us wisdom from watching thousands of people die. And they had all these regrets, and you, Bronnie Ware, is saying you don't have to be one of them. So today, as we start off the new year, you no doubtedly have all kinds of resolutions and plans for 2020. Here's what Moses is trying to get us to think about. There is the undeniable truth that there is one day going to be a date on your calendar that winds up on your tombstone. And honestly, you don't want your tombstone, you don't want your obituary to read, he was the vice president of that bank. You don't want your obituary to read, she had great hair. Right? No, it's in death you have clarity about what really matters and what really doesn't. And so I think a great way to start off the year together is to ask, in light of this, in light that we have limited, that our days are numbered, what is on our calendar that we want to add, and what is on our calendar that we want to take off? All across America, this is the world that we live in. In the New York Times just a couple of years ago, there was this article on how volunteer firefighters it's decreasing all across the country, and that's a problem because the majority of firefighting done in America is volunteer work. And that struck me because church is a volunteer organization. And all across the country, volunteer work in every organization is going down. Because when you try to cram so much into your life, we crowd out stuff that we think we would care about or that we think is important to us by inviting things that isn't that important to us. So there's this time the Apostle Paul, one of the first followers of Jesus, plants a church in Galatia, and he writes a letter back to them. And he writes this little section in Galatians 6 that I think a lot of us have heard as a threatening, ominous thing, but it doesn't need to be heard like that. Here's what Paul is writing this church. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please the flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good. So he's not just talking about if you're going to reap what you sow and that's bad. No, he's saying if you reap good, you'll get good. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. What are you talking about, Paul? Therefore, as we have the opportunity with these sands going through the hourglass, let us do good to all people, especially to those people who are the family of believers. And in light of what Paul's trying to do, work with a local church, getting them to be this, family that loves and serves and takes care of each other for the watching world, and ultimately serves and cares for the people around and outside as well. In light of what Paul's trying to do, in light of what the New Testament's trying to do, in light of what Jesus is trying to do, if I may be so bold, I'd like to make a suggestion. A couple of suggestions. One, I'm looking at a lot of people that I think probably need to take a Sabbath on a regular basis. And what I mean by that is just once a week, unplug from your phone, unplug from your devices, unplug from your job. Remind yourself not to take your life so seriously. Now, Jesus, a lot of you may remember Jesus was really hard on the Pharisees for the way they handled Sabbath. But Jesus didn't, he practiced Sabbath. Jesus is just trying to keep people from idolizing Sabbath. Remember what Jesus says, Sabbath was made for human beings. It was made for us. It was a gift from God for us. It's a way of not taking yourself too seriously. And by the way, I get that your kids' sports leagues don't prioritize this. I get that there's all kinds of things pulling at your time. But the reason it's important is because a lot of us are busy doing the wrong things, and we won't realize that until it leads us to the wrong places. Every person in this room have made some kind of binding commitments, right? There are binding commitments you cannot get out of or ought not get out of. But if you're a follower of Jesus, if you've been baptized and you decided you wanted to follow Jesus, that is your ultimate priority. That is your greatest binding commitment. And every other choice you have about where you live or where you work or what your relationships or what you're going to do with your leisure time is all supposed to be run through the lens of that binding commitment. A lot of the problems that we have these days is we make other binding commitments without realizing the hidden cost. And so we think, yeah, we can live in that house. It's a little bit bigger, without thinking about all the extra hours that you're going to have to work at the office to be able to pay for that house. Or we start another hobby, even though it means it might take away from some really needed ministry God called us to. And those might be the right decisions. I'm not saying if it's right or wrong, but what I am saying is pay attention to the hidden cost because your days are limited. Never underestimate the power of routine. Routine looks like, plain and ordinary, but never underestimate the power that your routine has to shape your life. You know who knows this? Any parent who has ever signed their kids up for a 6-year-old soccer league, right? Because in my experience, soccer leagues make more demands than most cults that I've seen. And a lot of us have these unspoken commitments that we're not paying attention to. And we would never say we want to spend our life doing it, but some of the unspoken commitments are, I'm going to watch everything Netflix has to offer. That's how I'm going to spend my days. Some of our unspoken commitments are, I'm deeply committed to entertainment and escaping reality. And I want to say this as dramatically as possible because most of us pay attention to the big commitments, right? Like where we're going to go to college or who we're going to marry or what kind of career we're going to have. But the unspoken commitments, that's the stuff, the routine, that's the stuff that adds up. It looks small at first, but slowly it adds up until you run out. And there starts to become a gap. I've seen this hundreds of times. There's a gap between the person we think we are and the life that we're actually living. And so here's the question I want to ask this morning, and I'm not trying to say this as a preacher even, as more like a fellow journeyer. This is not a thus saith the Lord. It's a question I say because I care about you. I would love for you to ask this question in your life groups, in your Bible class, with people that, your McDonald's coffee club. And here's the question. Do your commitments match your convictions? Do the things that you're inviting into your life on a daily basis that's in your calendar, does it match the stuff that you want to care about, that you say you care about? Because if we were to, walk through the auditorium this morning and ask everybody, what's the most important thing to you? We would probably run off with the same 3 or 4 things, God, church, family, those kind of things. But if we took stock of our actual life, often there's a big gap between what we say we value and how we spend our time. So for example, with Leslie and I, we've committed to, not making our lives revolve around our kids. We love our family too much to love them too much. And that involves being creative. A lot of y'all know whenever I go guest preach, I take one of the kids with me. And that involves a lot of, it's fun. There's a lot of crazy stuff that happens, but we want them to know what really matters to us. We want them to know, like, yeah, the Razorbacks are playing on Wednesday nights, and they're really good now, but we're going to show up to church on Wednesday nights. And it grieves me they can't change the SEC schedule a little bit. One of the most famous people that I will ever know in my life was Byron Nelson. He's great, probably the greatest golfer in history. Byron Nelson was a member at the Richland Hills Church of Christ when I worked there. I mean, when he died, his funeral was on SportsCenter. That's how big of a deal he was, which is not how Rick actually thought he was going to get on SportsCenter for the first time, but it was. But what I think about when I think of Byron Nelson, Brother Byron, isn't what a great golfer he was or his famous funeral. What I think about when I think of Byron Nelson is that every time the doors were open, he was there. Every time we had like vacation Bible school and we needed a little bit extra, this guy who like mentored people like Tiger Woods showed up early and got on his scooter and helped move stuff around to help pass the gospel on to the next generation. The Bible talks about this kind of way of giving as giving your first fruits, which means giving the best your life has to offer, not just whatever happens to be left over after you watch everything that Hulu has to offer. And if you take this seriously, it'll change your life. It'll change what you do with these days. It'll change the next generation. Think about this. How many times, I mean, I've done 100 funerals. How many of those funerals, the kids talked about one of the things that helped them know what really mattered to their parents was that they had to miss, and I kid you not, this has been brought up a dozen times, that they had to miss Disney's Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights because they went to church on Sunday nights. As much as they loved, as much as they complained and all the things, they reminded themselves, this is what's really important. Today, we poke fun of the idea that, previous generations used to believe that if you miss Wednesday night, you'd go to hell. I don't make fun of that anymore. Not because I think God's going to send people to hell for missing church. Honestly, I don't think that. But because after decades of ministry, I've seen people live in hell. Live in the hell of loneliness. Live in the hell of loss of meaning. Because what God is calling us together, not just so we'll, check off some box, but so that we'll love and care for each other. I have seen this time and time again. The great anecdote for a world of loneliness in the church is people in the church serving alongside, brothers and sisters serving alongside a common goal. And the great antidote for an overstuffed schedule is getting outside of ourselves and realizing how much of what we do isn't as important as we fool ourselves into thinking. Do you know what God is inviting you in to do? You realize the kind of life that's available to you? There's this time in 2 Corinthians where the same church planter, Paul, writes this letter and he says to people, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of all compassion and the God of all comfort." And then he says this verse, God comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort those with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because when you got cancer, you signed up for a ministry you never would have signed up for. And you hated it. But now whenever you hear somebody else has cancer, you're the first one to show up. Whenever you lost a spouse or a child, or you went through that hard season, you were signed up for a ministry you never would have chosen. But anytime someone else goes through something like that, you're the first in line to make sure they know they're not alone. I have seen this time and time again. It's one of the most beautiful things about churches. People go through difficult things, and they find that not only is God present with them, that God is also calling them to redeem that suffering by serving others through it. It's one of the great joys of being a preacher. I get to see this on a regular basis. I get a front row seat to stuff like this, like marriages being restored, enemies becoming friends, fractured relationships being healed, and people waking up to like a real meaningful, wonderful life. And the majority of times that happens, listen, it has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with the sermon or the assembly or anything. Obviously, I believe in all those things, but it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with God using ordinary people to transform the world in extraordinary ways. Because, and this is really important, church isn't done by professionals, right? Church isn't done by people like me. It's not done by your elders. It's not done by ministers. It's not done by deacons. It's done by people. And if something's going to happen in a church, if something's going to happen in a city, it's not going to be because I do it. Every church rises and falls. The vision of every church, the mission of every church rises and falls by people who are ordinary, willing to give a little bit of their time to be a part of something extraordinary. And so in light of all that, and in light of the fact that our days are limited, here's a few questions that I would like you to consider as we start off 2020 together. What do you need to do less of in life? Some of us need to quit some stuff because you only have a certain number of days. Do you really want to spend them doing that? And here's another one. What bothers you around here? What bothers you in this church? What bothers you? What grates at you in this city or in this world? Because maybe your complaint is a calling. Maybe your lack of community is God calling you to start a small group or a life group. And then number 3, what way has God comforted you that you need to pass on to others? Now listen, you don't have to do this. We can get by as a church without you carving out time of your schedule, but without you saying no so you can say yes to more important things. You can get by, we can get by, but you need to know if the people who planted PV decades earlier would have had that attitude, you wouldn't be here. Or if 10 years ago, or 2 years ago, or 6 months ago, when some of us came, when someone showed up, if you've been here in the last 10 years, 2 years, 6 months, if someone wouldn't have met you at the door and made you feel welcomed, or when you walked into that Bible class, asked you your name, if you weren't invited to that small group, if they wouldn't have done that, you wouldn't be here. Because remember, church isn't done by ministers. Church isn't done by elders or even deacons. It's done by us, the people. And somewhere in our community today, in our city, there is a wife who is begging her husband to go to church. And someday soon, they're going to show up. Somewhere in our community today, there are kids that are praying that their parents would take them to church. Somewhere in our community today, there are parents praying for their kids to go to church. And they have no idea we're getting ready for them, that we're saving a seat for them. Somewhere in Little Rock, there is a single mom who's wanting to have help, and she has no idea there is a team of volunteers working at Boone Park that's getting ready for her. Somewhere in Little Rock, there is a kid who just dropped out of high school and thinks their future is over. And they have no idea there is a tutor God is raising up in this room right now who's going to change his or her life. And when they get here, we're going to invite them into more than just attending a service. We're going to invite them into following Jesus, to making a difference in this life. Listen, every one of us, our time is one day going to run out. Every single one of us. That's the universal truth. And all of our ambitions will die with us. But you can live a life that is secure in the eternity of God. You can have real peace in that. You can make your days count for more than just having a great fiscal quarter or earning some kind of plastic trophy that your kids were going to have to throw away with after the funeral. Our lives can make a difference together for the good of the world and the glory of God. Our lives can make a difference together if we have time to share. And if you're too busy for that, chances are you're just too busy. This is what it means to belong to a church. This is how we remind ourselves we're not that important, that our days are numbered. It's how we learn to count our days and make our days count. Do you know that invitations, like what we do at the end of sermons, you know how those originally started? They weren't to get people to come down and get saved. That's a great thing to happen at the end of sermons. But that wasn't originally what it started out as. It started out in the 13th and 14th century as preachers were preaching about the implications of the gospel and how God was trying to change things like slavery. These preachers would end their sermons by saying, all right, who's ready to do something? Like become an abolitionist. In light of who Jesus is and in light of what God is doing in the world, anybody who wants to come forward and fight slavery, why don't you do that right now? Invitations started as a way of people signing up to do mission together. And so, today, consider this your invitation. Right after the benediction, there's going to be a bunch of ways to make your days count in the gym, in the FLC. I would love it if every one of us would walk through there and just consider, what is God calling us to do with our limited number of days? Because you don't have to have those regrets. You can look at your life in light of what the amount of time that God has given you, and you can count your days and make your days count. This is the time of your life. All right, I'd like to invite our shepherds to take their places in the aisles. If you've got anything going on, maybe you'd like them to pray for you, to bless you in this coming year. Maybe you'd like for them to help give you clarity on how to spend your life. Pray for that. Or maybe you'd like to know more about following Jesus and being baptized. If so, you can come down to me right here. I would love to talk to you about Jesus. If you would come to me while together we stand.